Hello, hello, hello. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Man Speak. Man Speak is our offshoot to the Heart Warrior series, and there I'm interviewing at least 100 men to find out about their journey into the heart. And some of our Heart Warriors are coming back to do a whole nother episode on Man Speak about a topic, their chosen topic, close to their heart, something they're passionate about, something they're embodied in, something they're knowledgeable about, that they want to share a whole episode with, man to man, and of course for us women watching as well. Today we have our number 17 Heart Warrior back again, Justin Carpenter, and he is esoteric wizard, truth seeker, truth speaker. And the topic today is transitioning away from death with food. So a whole new concept of us regenerating, moving away from death, and the tool, of course, and the divine gift is food, if we're knowledgeable about it and if we respect it. Enjoy. Hello, Justin. Welcome back to Man Speak.
Hey, Gemma, thanks for having me once again. It's always such a pleasure to be here. Truly, it's amazing, an amazing experience. And you do such a phenomenal job at guiding these conversations. So it's always a joy. It's always a wonderful experience. So I'm happy to do it once again.
Oh, amazing. And if anyone hasn't seen Justin's two previous Man Speak episodes, we did a great one on fasting, and the other one was navigating the awakening. So you can find those on the YouTube channel. Now, today's topic is so fascinating and a whole new concept for a lot of people. It's transitioning away from death with food. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
Well, so it really comes down to simplistic way of looking at this whole experience that we're having. And there's one path to reunification. There's one way to reunite, to activate ourselves. This is the Christed path, the way, whatever you want to term for it. This is the path to enlightenment, and this is where many of us come to this realization, and we start to go onto this path. But there's also the other way, which is not really a way, and the whole aim of this is to dilute that path as much as possible, so that we are never finding ourselves, we're never finding this realization, we're never finding that we have the Christ within. And so we stay in this sort of dumbed down slave-like mentality. That's where those that control this realm love to keep people in that state, to keep them from realizing what they're doing. And so it comes down into this split decision, and this is God or devil, or Jesus or Lucifer, or whatever, however you want to term for it from it. But it's also life or death. There's those who are ascribed to death and want to ensure that everyone stays in this death cycle, because we are eternal beings. I am not this body. I am not just bound to this one body in this one time around. I am eternal, but if I'm convinced that this is my only life, and I continually just keep dying, then I never accumulate any sort of awareness to continue rising past this certain state. And if I stay in this state, then I stay dying always, because we reincarnate. There's no end to us. This is eternal. We are eternal. This is an eternal experience. But if I'm always dying without accumulating any sort of spiritual awareness, then I stay in that slave-like mentality. So all the aims of it's an aspect of ourselves that wants to keep us locked in this state. But this cabal, or however you want to term it, is there to help us ultimately to rise past the need for that teaching mechanism, so that we can overcome this challenge. We can overcome this barrier that's keeping us in this lower state. So every time we elevate, there's always a challenge, some sort of aspect that we have to overcome. So it's really helpful to just kind of distinguish all our decisions between life or death, and then we can really classify every single one of our decisions as fitting into those categories. But with food specifically, it's much easier to distinguish where we're going and how that applies, because it's much more logical. You can see it intrinsically. So within that title concerning food, it's everything we've been lied to about everything, every single aspect from top to bottom, and this includes food. People like to pretend like it doesn't include food, but it includes food as well. We've been trained to eat all these things that keep us in this death cycle, that keep us dying instead of moving towards the spaces where we live. So it really is a huge, it's a difference between team life and team death. And we've all been trained to be on team death for our whole lives. And it's not our fault necessarily, but it is our responsibility to acknowledge that we were on team death. And now we need to reestablish our alliance and go on to team life. So with food specifically, it's recognizing that the ways that we've been taught to eat, what we've been taught about health, everything that we know in that regards is flipped upside down. It's backwards as far as what we need to be doing. So they've trained us to eat all of these basically, I mean, it comes down very simply into they've trained us to eat dead decaying things. If we're trained to eat flesh of another creature that's rotting and decrepit and all these other sorts of things, and that creature has been tortured and killed on its own, then I don't know any other physical representation of death than that. And so if we're eating that, then that becomes a part of our reality. And so you can look at it from that perspective. And then from a physiological perspective, our bodies are just not capable of digesting and utilizing that kind of stuff without the aid of parasites and other sort of bacteria and things to break that stuff down. And so when we create these sort of bonds with these entities, these parasites, then they're in that death cycle as well, because they're always in that scarcity, fear-based lack mentality as well. And then that attaches into our psyche, and it just creates this loop where we're don't really realize what we're doing, but we're eating death. And so we shall have death. This is just the natural principle of everything. We create this reality by our choices. We create everything based on what we do. So when we eat animal bits and things, excretions from animals that are made for animals, they're not made for us. When we do all of these things that take us away from what is natural, then we do experience death as a byproduct. It's just a part of the experience, and we can choose to have it if we want to, or we can choose to walk into the life path and move away from that. So what is living food? Well, it's the stuff that grows from the ground and it's full of life. This is it's very logical from that perspective, but we just go through all these little tricks and things that the cabal has placed in front of us to condition us away from this very simple, very fundamental truth that to eat life, to have life, we must eat life. And if we want death, we eat death. And this is just the simple principle of that. So yeah, so that's kind of the thought process behind the show title for today, is just how do we navigate away from this this way of eating death and eating foods that kill us, and moving towards the foods that bring us life and vitality. So that was kind of the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I love it. So fascinating. And just two short things came up for me to say. I loved how you said, well, in a way, in a nutshell, you're sort of saying, when we're choosing food, are we choosing life or are we choosing death? Are we choosing to move closer to our own mortal death, or are we choosing closer to immortality, or transitioning
Yes.
away from death? And we can do that every time we open the fridge, and that'd be a great habit. I'm just thinking for me, like that might work to stop me choosing the chocolate. Even though I do have a big tub of watermelon next to the chocolate, so I'm getting better. And the other thing, and I don't think I've ever noticed this before, but as you were talking, you're saying choosing life. The word life is so similar to the word light. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, light is what our, fruit and plant-based all based on. And the other thing, which I think is a really important connection to make when you were talking about how we've been lied to, is the big lie, and I know we've mentioned it, but it's so important. Like, people eat meat because they think they need protein. And that's the big sales pitch. And I know my boys are like, oh, well, not so much now, but need my protein, need my protein. It's such huge conditioning. Would you like to recap on that, please, Justin?
Sure. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to mention quickly the life and light thing before we move on from that. It is very much the case. And when we eat light light giving foods, I mean, it is trapped sunlight. I mean, the fruit that grows from the tree is just the embodiment of that sunlight and that tree breathing and drawing in minerals from the earth. So it's this perfect balance of the warmth of the sun and then the giving of the mother earth, so it has all of these wonderful properties, and then that instills into us, so we become lighter, not just physically weight wise, but we become lighter, as in we become full of light. And so this is very much the same as life is light, we are light, and when we try and deny this fact that we are light, then ultimately we become darkness and we become weighted down and heavy and death and decaying. It's this two choices we have, and it's really no choice at all. But while we're still figuring this out, it seems like it's a choice, and it seems like this is, because it's either doing it or not doing it, and not doing it is dying, doing it is living. And this is this intrinsic aspect to it. But you mentioned oh, sorry, repeat your question. What was the last thing that you mentioned?
Protein.
Oh yeah, about the protein. Yeah. So that's the big one that gets people hung up on, this idea that I got to eat my protein in order to be strong and have muscle. And that's just another lie pushed onto us. This is part of this whole fabrication of getting us deceived into this space that, you have to eat protein in order to build protein. But this just comes with a fundamental misunderstanding of how does our body synthesize protein. It doesn't synthesize protein from other proteins. It synthesizes proteins from amino acids and from the glucose, which is the building block, which is the fuel. So you've got your minerals, which are your building blocks, and then you've got your glucose, which is your fuel. And this is how your body synthesizes protein. It doesn't need the actual protein in order to do that. So if you're eating protein, you're adding another layer of the steps that your body has to do in order to get anything useful out of it. So it has to take that protein, break it down into something useful, and most of it just has to discard. Most of it's just food for the parasites. Most of it's just for sensations and that kind of thing. It doesn't actually help us do any of that. But our body does get kind of where it trips people up is our bodies do get accustomed to things. We are miraculous. Our bodies are miraculous. So it's always going to be able to make the best use of whatever it is we're consuming. And so when we've spent our whole life eating these meats and all these different things, our body starts to optimize towards that in a way. It's still a suboptimal way of living, but it does optimize towards that, which is then what discourages people from moving away from that suboptimal process that your body is accustomed to. So this is where people get tripped up on this idea that, oh, I have to do this, because if I stop doing it, I don't feel the same, or, it takes time, because it does take time. It takes time to reacclimate back to the optimal systems, which is simply just providing the body the fuel that it needs to do what it do. Our body produces everything it could possibly need, as long as we give it the proper fuel, as long as we give it just that glucose, which is the simplest form of sugar, which is what our body's searching for in every type of food, no matter what, as the primary source of fuel. So if we're not doing that, then our body has to go through all these other processes to break things down to get what it really wants. And the more toil and process that our body is put through, the more acids it creates. It's like an engine. If it doesn't have oil, it produces a lot of heat. This is the same within our body. When you're running an engine, or when you're running our body, overstimulating it with all these different things that it has to do, then it's creating this acidic environment, which is the cause of all diseases. All diseases are completely made up. There's not a single disease out there that is true in the sense of how they classify it. They're just one thing, and it's hyperacidity or acidosis within the body. It's this acid buildup and flare up in different regions. And when those accumulate for different reasons, toxins or whatever, but oftentimes it's just the toil that our body has to go through. So alkalinity is life, and alkalinity is all about ease. Alkalinity is all about the ease on our body to do what it needs to do. So the more that we're eating things that are in alignment with this ease, the better it's able to assimilate what it needs to, get what it needs to out of it, and go on about its day, doing the things that it really needs to do, which is bringing us to optimum health and living, repairing ourselves. I mean, there's no reason whatsoever why cells should ever die. They don't need to die. The cells themselves are perfect, but the only reason they ever die is because of toxic overload, because of this acids that build up in our body. It gets gunked up, and then we can't eliminate properly, and then all the things start to break down over time. And this is the only reason why aging ever even happens, is because we've got toxic buildup, and this is part of this death cycle. And this is what we're conditioned to into believing from the very get-go. But the protein lie is a huge aspect of that. And even vegans will say that you need to get your plant-based protein, and that's just simply not true as well. You don't need condensed forms of protein like that. The Mother Earth provides there's a small amount of protein in all fruits and vegetables, and that's it, the perfect form for our body, just to provide that basic structure of moving things through the body. But it's not necessary in order to build that protein. And you don't have to look any further than a gorilla or an elephant or any large a cow, like any large, strong creature. I mean, how do you think they get their protein? They don't eat protein. They just synthesize it because they're eating what their body's naturally designed to eat. They're eating their species specific diet, and we're not. Most of us are far from eating what our body is intended to eat. We're far from eating what what is easy for us to assimilate, easy for us to process. And so the further we dip away from nature, and the further we dip away from the truth about us, then we do experience death. I mean, life is in congruency with truth. And so the more that we deny truth and live in that space of denial, then we have death as a byproduct, because we're not living in congruency with the natural order. This is how we are, and we can deny it all we want to mentally. I can deny what is natural all I want to and say that's not true, and plug my ears and say la la la, I don't believe you. But it doesn't care. It doesn't matter what you say, or how you want to go about. You're still going to die if you eat these things that are not made for you. And so this is just recalibrating our mentality around what food is. And it is just these raw living foods. These are perfectly designed for us to create no toil for us whatsoever, especially the fruit tree. I mean, you look at it just from a simplistic manner in that perspective. The fruit tree requires no tilling, it requires no toil, it requires no labor, maybe care here and there to help optimize its growth. That's where we stand in as a steward of this earth, but really it doesn't require very much at all. And this is just the perfect representation of God's gift to us and what we're supposed to be eating, because it's right there. It's easy, it's free, it's abundant. It doesn't ever stop. You throw the seeds out and it grows more trees and more trees and more trees, and it never stops. So the whole creation is designed to show us what is natural and what is fit for us. And then we, with our minds, we invent all these other ways to move away from that. And every time we start to use our thought to bypass what is natural and what should be, it gets us into trouble. And that's where we are right now. So yeah, all that to say, that's a big part of the protein lie, is this idea that we need it in order to grow protein. But it's a fundamental misunderstanding about human physiology and how this all works. And until people are really, really willing to revisit that, then it's like, okay, well, have fun with that. And but one thing, another aspect that gives kind of this illusion that protein helps, or that you need meat or whatever else, and because you'll see bodybuilders or whatever, and they'll be eating these things to bulk up and all this other kinds of stuff. Well, it's the stimulating effect that really provides that sort of intensity. So when you've got meat that's been adrenalized, the creature has been tortured to the point where it's full of adrenaline. This is a stimulant of sorts, and our body can utilize it as such, and it can utilize it for short-term gain. There is a short-term sort of power that you gain from doing such, but it comes at a cost. So this is akin to black magic. This is akin to these darker arts, because you're going for a quick fix, which can have the appearance of bulk and physicality for short term, but you'll notice bodybuilders have heart attacks when they're in their 40s. You know, they have all these problems within their internal systems because our body is not made to do that. It can for a short term. Our body is miraculous in adapting to that space, but it is not made to do that for a long time. So it's like with any sort of dark arts. Yeah, you can try it, but if you won't go down that route, there is a price to pay, and that price is heavy, and that price is death, unfortunately. And so this is just this recalibration and moving back away from these practices that bring us down into that space and moving us back into alignment with that which is true and that which is life.
And I know you can Google, there's plenty of, well, vegan or plant-based weightlifters, you know, that you can find on YouTube and that to, you know, prove that you don't need protein. I thought it was important to touch on that because I think that's the biggest lie that keeps people in the darkness of food. Okay, so for those that are still here, let's move on. What about, I think we could recap on a couple of the food groups and make our way from darkness into light. So we've spoken about meat. What about dairy? Any light in dairy?
Well, I mean, no, ultimately we're not we're not baby cows, we're not baby goats, we're not any of those things. That food is designed for those creatures and those creatures alone. I mean, our physiology, we're designed to drink milk, our mother's milk, until we're about 2 to 3 years old. You know, that's about the point where we're not able to synthesize the structure of that milk as easily. So at that point, it's really not even healthy for us to consume any longer after that point. But our body's made to do that for a short time because it helps to stimulate that growth. But it's not good to supplement it with a cow's milk because again, we're not a baby cow. So these foods just from that specific space alone is enough to say no. But then you have to look at the industries behind these things as well, and the disgusting uh, conditions that these animals are put through. You know, they're tortured, they're force bred in order to stimulate that milk production, and it just creates all this traumatizing effect that then goes into the milk. And so then when we drink that or consume that or eat that dairy or whatever, then that's also become a part of that, a part of us. You know, just watch the documentary Earthlings and you'll see uphand very close and personal what these different industries do and how they operate and what how they treat the animals and all this other kinds of stuff. I mean, it's full of pus, like this the disgusting torture that these creatures go through. It imbues this pus into, and they don't strain that out. Like they just diet or do whatever they need to give it the appearance that it doesn't have that anymore, and then they market it. You know, so it's this disgusting. So you know that's another aspect as well. But just again, logically, we're not those creatures. Now, if in rare examples that the animal is cared for as a part of the family, and you know, say you have a pet goat and you milk the goat and it's very very well loved and all this other kind of stuff, you at least take away the karmic repercussions of the torture and all that kind of stuff that happens from an industry led experience. So I haven't experienced that myself, but I've heard that it tastes much better and it probably is much healthier for you than the tortured version of that. So if you're going to go that route, you know, then at least don't torture the creature and make sure that they're well cared for. Still, this is not going to be bringing us to optimum health because we're not designed to eat these kinds of things. But at least you're taking away from the karmic repercussions of, you know, the aspects of the industry. Um, so yeah, that would be kind of the answer towards dairy. Eggs, the same thing. You know, we're not baby chickens. An egg is a little chicken, period. You know, if we're just being very blunt about what it is, it's and we're not designed to eat that. You know, it's not made for us, and it creates this congealing. I mean, what are eggs used for in general? They're a binding agent. You know, that's what you use them in foods and things like that. So what do you think it does in our body? It binds up everything. It slows everything down. It creates this sticky sludge like stuff, and it creates that toil for our body to have to process and get rid of. Not to mention, you know, the tortured chickens aspect as well. But say it is a healthy chicken and it's cared for, it's still not made for us. So if we're going to pretend like that is food for us and it's not, then we ultimately suffer some consequences from doing so. So it's not like I'm writing the script. I'm not making all this kind of stuff up. I used to love eggs, and I used to love cheese. I used to love meat. I used to love all those things. But when I really got honest with myself and recognized that, oh, there's no argument. There's no argument for it anymore. I can't justify doing these kinds of things because everything is stacked up against them as far as it's just not made for us. We're, so those would be kind of the summation of the animal products aspect, and what we're made from that. So that'd be where I go from there.
All right. What about grains? Any light in grains? They're plants.
Yeah, well, grains, you're moving in the right direction because obviously you're not going to have suffering of a sentient being in order to consume that kind of stuff. I think all grains are not created equal. That's for sure. If we're talking about the hybridized, GMO versions of wheat and these kinds of things that are have a lot of gluten. I mean, it's in the word gluten glue. So this again just sticks inside of us and makes everything gunk down. It slows down digestion. It makes everything hard to process. It coats our intestines with all sorts of gunk. So I'd highly recommend not eating any conventional wheat. That's for sure. But there are various grains that are better than others. If you can go for sprouted grains, that's going to be optimum because and this is an ancient practice that we've forgotten, but when you sprout the grains, you change the whole chemistry of that grain to start to bring in more of those life properties within it. And then it actually does help bring us more of that living aspect within us. So that used to be an ancient practice where they would sprout all the grains before they created the breads and things of that nature. And they never used yeast either. Yeast is a fungus and it's horrible for us. It creates this imbalance within us. It's a very acidic, creates a lot of acid within us. So yeast is another nasty aspect of grains when we talk about breads and things of that nature. So generally, if you want optimum health, grains should be avoided. They kind of are very dense. They're hard to process. They're hard to digest. There are healthier versions of grains. I've heard like quinoa is a relatively healthy version. Some people consider chickpeas a grain, although that's kind of a pea versus it's kind of a grain. Spelt. I've heard usually these more ancient grains, the ones that have been less manipulated, less modified, those are going to be your better versions of it. A lot of people look into Dr. Sebi's work and his sort of classification around what foods have been modified and what's haven't. I like his list. It's a very short list of grains. If you are going to eat grain, or if I ever eat grains, I stick to that list. And it really is, I think it's like 5 things on there. I don't remember all of them, but spelt, quinoa, and chickpeas were 3 of those. So yeah, it's not optimum. It's not made for us. And really it comes down to, it's a very simple truth, but if it raw from the ground, if it doesn't appeal to us to eat as is, it's not made for us. And this is just a very simple thing that you can apply to everything. And it comes back to our logic. It's like, oh, that makes total sense because it does, it just is. And so every time we step away from it and we have to introduce cooking or spices or salts or anything to make that palatable, well, we're moving away from what is natural and we're moving into what is unnatural. And every time natural is life, unnatural is death. So if we're staying in that space too, that this is something ultimately to be moved away from to some extent or another. Now, it just depends on where we are within that journey. These are stepping stones that kind of move out of it. So I don't say that to just say, hey, just dump it completely. If you're in a space where you need something like that to kind of sustain, if you're moving away from the animal products and you're having more grains, then you're still moving in the right direction. But this is something to ultimately let go of if we want to experience these sort of more elevated states of being.
I love how, you're enforcing that it's a transition, because ultimately, it's a big step to just drop everything and transition straight to fruit. So this is sort of the journey, yeah, and you've done it, and I've done it a bit more intermittently, but always heading in the right direction. So yeah, what have we got now? Vegetables and legumes.
Yeah, so those would be two different categories. Legumes are, again, not really that optimal for us. They're kind of like beans. They're real sticky inside of us. They create, like, just imagine like refried beans, that kind of stickiness exists inside of us when we eat this kind of stuff. So they do get gunked up. They're very hard to process. But again, if that's something that's helping you transition away from eating meat, and you want to have a bean chili or something like that, then that's a wonderful step away from it. So it's all with this transitional mindset that no, this is not optimal. But if it's used as a stepping stone to move away from something that is even less optimal than that, then it's wonderful. Um, so that's kind of the in general about those. But the purpose of the legumes, they're um, nitrous suppliers of the soil. So these plants are there to support other plants growing. So they're wonderful to plant around fruit trees. They're wonderful to plant around other plants that provide life, because they give more food to those plants. They give more benefits to that soil, but it's ultimately not really for us. And again, with that same principle of, if you try to eat, a legume without cooking it, you're going to hurt yourself, because they're inedible without the cooking process. So again, this requires this unnatural process to bring it back to some sort of way to eat. Um, so yeah, that would be kind of the legume category. And then uh, with vegetables, that's another step in the right direction, because you're heading more towards these raw living foods, where there are plenty of vegetables out there that you're very comfortable to eat straight out of the ground, straight from the garden, and they're delicious that way. Vegetables are kind of a bit of a gray area, though, in some cases, because in their raw form, they're harder to digest and harder to break down. We're not herbivores. We're frugivores. So our bodies aren't really made to break down vegetables and leaves and things of that nature. So it sometimes with certain things, it's better to cook them. And if you're going to cook, steaming or anything involving water is going to help to keep you from cooking it too much, to past the point where you're cooking the life out of it. So steaming, boiling, any of those kind of methods, as long as you drink the water as well that you boiled them in, because that's where a lot of the nutrients go to. But this is a way that you can kind of help to break down the sort of fibrous parts of the vegetables to make it more easy to assimilate. A lot of people will go straight to raw vegan, and then they start eating lots of raw vegetables, and they find they can't assimilate them. Their poop has tons of just like undigested vegetables within it, and this is because our body's really not able to process that kind of stuff very easily. So it still is not going to be optimal. But again, if and I love going for like carrots and hummus. That's a great thing to reach for. That's going to be a beautiful snack to have. It's not going to be as optimal as certain things, but that's a wonderful segue. That's a wonderful space to go to, as to have something that's not moving into whatever else. So they're just different stepping stones that we can look at to kind of get to that space of moving towards the raw living foods.
Yeah, and don't cows have like 2 or 4 stomachs that to just digest grass? You know,
Yeah,
so
four stomachs, I believe. Yeah, so it's a long process for their body's designed for that. So they're constantly chewing, they're constantly grazing. It's just a slow moving process moving through their body. I mean, in herbivores, digestional tract is very long, whereas a carnivore's digestional tract is very short. And we're on the shorter end of the digestional tract, where I think longer. Well, there's carnivore, omnivore, frugivore, and herbivore. Those are the 4 categories of food eaters in this world. We're often told about the 3. We're not often told about the frugivore, which is what we are. So I wonder why they don't tell us about that. But that's what the classification that chimpanzees and primates often fall into, is this frugivore aspect, which is fruits, nuts, or fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. That's what our body is designed for. The digestional tract of a frugivore is going to be longer than a carnivore and an omnivore, but much shorter than an herbivore. An herbivore has got a very long digestional tract in order to give the body time to assimilate that food as it's moving through. Ours is not quite as long. So eating stuff like that doesn't really, we can't really assimilate it that well. The sort of structure of a lot of plants doesn't break down within our digestive system. So that's where introducing like cooking and things of that nature, steaming can help to break those things down to make it easier to process and digest. So yeah.
So if I didn't already know the answer to this, I would be sitting here thinking, well, what can I eat? What's left? Chocolate and fruit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, fruit is really what the optimum form of food for us is. It is the top of the top of the pyramid as far as what is easiest to assimilate. As I mentioned, glucose is what our body is really searching for when it's digesting anything. So what is the easiest form of glucose to digest? Well, the fruit is. It is just so it's so simple to convert to those sugars. It's so simple to utilize in that sort of way. So our body celebrates when it has this kind of stuff, and it's able to spend so much less time and energy digesting so that it can focus more on healing itself, more on addressing whatever else it needs to. And this again is what leads to our aging and our decaying, is when our body has no time to address the things that it needs to. It has no time to heal itself. It's always focused on this digestion. Most people, when they eat a standard everything diet, it takes forever for the food to come out of you. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people can have things locked within them for years and years and years because it gets gunked up somewhere or another. Fruit doesn't have that issue. It digests really well, it moves through you, and that's it. So this sort of sweet spot, and of the that's really made for us. This just like I mentioned, to look further than a fruit tree just to see how perfect it is, just a, a gift to us. It's this gift of creation designed for us to eat. It's appealing for us. You set a table, full of all sorts of different food categories, and you put a child into the room, and you say, hey, go have fun, go eat. And maybe they're on one section, there's like raw meat, some sort of whatever kind of aspect, and another there's like dried beans, and there's another, from raw farm. The kid's always going to go toward raw fruit every time. No doubt. The strawberries, the blueberries, like these are the things that's really appealing to us. They naturally draw us in with their colors, their smells, their taste. Everything about that in its raw form is designed to allure us. It's designed to attract us because it wants us to eat it. It's like, here, I'm here for you. I'm here in this perfect form, here made for you to eat. But we like to deny this. We like to deny this fact and look at all these complicated ways that we create foods. And why do we think they have all these different cooking shows and all these different aspects to get us into this mindset that food has to be complicated, that it has to be complex, and we have to move away from this simple thing that's just staring at us right in the face. Here, eat me. This is what I'm made for. I'm made for you. I'm made for you to eat and to live in abundance, so that you don't have to spend so much time in the kitchen toiling and all this time collecting and gathering. It's there growing for you abundantly. And when we live in a climate where this can grow year round, then this is something that can easily be just a part of our day, where it's like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to go out and graze for a little bit. Maybe I'll climb a tree and eat some fruit, and maybe I'll meditate in that tree for a bit. And then when I'm done, I'm done. And there's no toil, there's no effort. Everything is just as perfectly as it needs to be. So we don't have to look any further than this form of food, form of health. But they're getting to that point. So
Yeah.
go ahead. Did you have
No,
something?
sorry, because you've been breaking up a little bit. So I thought
Oh,
you'd finished, but you hadn't. It was just a little delayed. That's good. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Everything about the colors to the taste to the attraction, but it's come. What about like people that live in the where there are no fruit trees, for want of a better word, like tops of mountains in the northern, towards the North Pole, towards the South Antarctic. You know what I mean? Those
Yeah.
environments where there are no fruits.
Yeah, well, we've got to really examine the reasons why we're all in these different spaces. And when we know so little about our history and why we exist in all these different spaces, then it really leaves no room other than the fact that commerce and the hands of man are what's pulled us away from our natural environment. Our natural environment would be a space where we're in abundance year round, where there is no toil and we can just be, because ultimately we're here to exist and to create. We're not here to toil and work and have all this complications about our day. We're here to find ourselves and be the best versions of ourselves, not always be spending all this time doing all these other sorts of things. So the only reason we exist in all these other spaces is because we've been tricked into going to all these different spaces. And you can find examples where, wars bring people to different regions, or the allures of, fake gold rushes and things of that nature, where they literally just make up nonsense in order to get people to move to all sorts of different areas, to encourage them through commerce and greed. So they create these lack-based mentalities by creating this scarcity, and then they encourage people to go where they perceived abundance is that they've created, and then they pull the rug out from them there too. And then all of a sudden you've got more people spread out, more spaces that they don't need to be. So the more that we come back into balance, it will be a natural migration back to the spaces to where we can grow food in abundance year round. And we'll be asking ourselves, when we don't live in these spaces, well, what am I doing? Why am I still here? Not saying that those spaces aren't wonderful to go to, but as a consistent way of living, we need to be in those spaces where it is abundant and there's plenty of space around on the region, which the tropics, that's the golden zone. That's where everything can grow in abundance year round. It's the perfect climate. Things grow very quickly. I mean, I'm here in Mexico. It's crazy how fast things grow. You plant a papaya tree, and and within a few months you've got a beautiful tree, and it's already growing. You can see the papaya starting to grow. Like, it's miraculous. And this is not true with all trees. Sometimes they take longer. But when we all have this mindset of this is our natural state, it won't take but a few years time to completely transform this world to the space where there's so much food growing everywhere freely that there won't have to be any commerce or any sort of like ideas that it has to cost money or people can't have enough of it. So it really is just it requires a holistic examination of how big this deception really has been. How big have we been fooled into moving away from who we actually are? How far have we been pulled away from that which is natural to this unnatural state, to experiencing this death cycle? They have taken nothing out of the equation as far as tricking us into these spaces of deceiving ourselves into thinking this is normal or this is okay, that I should have to work this hard in order to get food, that we do have to ship things this far in order to feed people. It's madness. Like, that's truly just madness. But we haven't realized this because we don't think that people could pull off a lie to this magnitude. So of course, if we're not unwilling to examine it, then we're just going to continue blindly following the lie and saying, oh, this is just how it's always been, and I'm not going to question anything. And then generations and generations and generations come along, and we get further and further and further away from the truth until we're at this point where it's like, holy shit, we have gotten so far away from our roots. We've gotten so far away from who we are and what we're trying to do, that it takes a sort of a pretty big recalibration. So I don't have any doubt that people will move back to those spaces. I also know that, power, the scarcity around power is also a complete fabrication as well. The fact that they've introduced this idea of electricity, and that somehow power has to be regulated and there has to be a cost of it, and it can only be some, like, that's ridiculous as well, because they never talk about magnetism, which is infinite and can create infinite energy that lasts forever. And so when we get back to a magnetic based energy system, then all of a sudden power is not an issue. So then people can create greenhouses and things of that nature that have heat year round, and they can grow whatever they want to. So we'll get back to these ways to where we can get much more creative as into growing things year round, than we are now. But everything's been designed in this fear-based, lack-based scarcity mindset to keep us away from this simple realization. Because if we are always running around trying to feed our families, not knowing where I'm gonna, and always working, always trying to, I've got to go home and cook dinner for the kids. If I've got to make sure I have enough money to pay rent, all this other kinds of stuff, then we don't ever have time to actually sit and think about this. We have no time to question, well, why am I here? What am I doing? Why am I doing all this? And that's the space that they love to get us into, so that we never realized it. But we're realizing it now. So we're coming out of that.
Yeah, I just need to clarify something on the last point, because when you're talking about, the natural place for humans is to live where there's fruit trees. So I'm thinking of one, Africa, because I'm thinking of traditional cultures and tribes that have been there for how long? And, in the arid places in Africa, I don't know if there's fruit trees. And I'm also thinking of northern Canada, the traditional Indigenous people up there, I mean, they've been there for thousands of years.
This
Are you
lie,
saying that
this,
they
this,
also
yeah,
were
this
moved
lie has
there on
gone.
purpose?
Yes, this lie has gone on for a long, 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 long time. I mean, this is a complete obfuscation of who we are and where we've been. Everything that we know about history is upside down. We know very little really about the ways that we got into these spaces in a specific kind of manner. I think we're going to uncover more of them, but the more you dig into it, it starts to become more clear that after a certain point, and even the last 100 200 years is still very difficult to see what's real and what isn't. They've tried to flip everything upside down within that space as well, but you move past that point and it just gets cloudier and cloudier and cloudier and cloudier, because it has just been this obfuscation from, for as long as I don't know how long it's been going on, but it doesn't take much to look at just how unnatural everything is. And everything within creation is always finding balance. We are part of creation, so naturally we would come back to balance. So the only ways that we're out so far out of balance is because there's been some artificial probing, some artificial stimulation to get us to these spaces. um, so that's that. And then, I mean, just look at one example with the Sahara Desert. That's a whole region that used to be one of the most fertile, abundant growing areas with so much water, but they, through their manipulation, they have turned that into a desert wasteland, because they hate us and they don't want us to find out these things, because they know that that whole region would be just full of life, would be full of abundance, and so many people would live there, so many people would be able to experience life and that vitality there so easily. But they've destroyed that whole region on purpose, using all of their nasty technology to create this desert wasteland, all on purpose to keep us away from this realization. So they do this through the East as well. They create these deserts. They supply. They make it impossible for us to find it, and then they introduce this scarcity mindset around power, so that we aren't even able to use these natural abilities of drawing water up from the ground using magnetic energy as well. We can create oases pretty easily. I mean, I've seen it happen. That's what Muammar Gaddafi in Libya was doing. He was regrowing that whole region with water. And it was becoming one of the most abundant and fertile and beautiful regions of the earth. And they came in. What did they do to him? They destroyed. They bombed the crap out of any of his canals. They bombed everything as part of that infrastructure, bringing back that vitality to that region. And they killed him as well. I mean, I don't think they actually did. I think he got away, but that's what they tried to do. That's what they wanted to do. And in a public mindset, that's what they did, because they can't let anyone find this out. They can't let anyone start to build these oases and have this abundance, because then it throws everything in their lie out the window. And we start to realize that they've deceived us about everything at that point. So it's just been a consistent approach of making sure that no semblance of the truth ever comes out, so that we stay in this scarcity mindset where we think, oh, I have to move to these areas where food only grows for a very small window of the year, and I just have to deal with it. Otherwise, oh, there's not enough food to go around. So let me start eating the animals and other sorts of things, and create these industries that are based on that kind of stuff too. It's a very calculated, conniving, nefarious plan that has been going on for a while, but it's all part of that.
Wow. And well, one thing that, of course, runs through my head is Australia. We've got such a vast desert, with the size of the states. And we will get back to food, but I would just have to mention this for the Aussies. We're the size of the states. We've only got 25 million people, because there's only really a limited amount, a strip really along the east coast, southeast coast, where is actually inhabitable. But I'm wondering if something has gone there on with the Australian desert too, that if that was once
I,
a
I,
lush environment. Sorry, you
yeah,
froze.
no
You want to
doubt.
talk?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I have no doubt that is the case with that region as well. It has to be. That the people there, the Aborigines, the original man, that's where we came from, and by some accounts. So I know that they don't want any sense of that connection to Mother Earth being a part of this experience, because then we start to realize, oh, Mother Earth provides everything that we need, so we can't have anyone connecting with her, because then we start to unmask their lie. So everything has been very calculated in what they and what sort of lies they press. Yeah, so that's another big part of it as well.
Okay, and back to food. Where do we need to take this conversation, Justin, to get back on track?
Well, I mean, there's always relevancy to everything, because truly understanding the lie is the first and foremost step that we have to do to move out of it. So having a good grasp on just the depth of this lie and how far it goes is always very relevant. But if we want to bring it back to the practical, I mean, we can just talk about the steps that one might take in order to start moving away from these death foods, these sort of spaces that are created to keep us in these lower vibrational states, so that we're always dying. And it really does, it's as simple as taking a good first honest look about what it is that I'm eating. What am I eating on a day-to-day basis? And truly be honest with oneself. Don't compare yourself to anybody else. Don't try and skip anything as far as what that is and what that looks like. And that's something that most people aren't really willing to do. Even if you're talking to somebody else, you won't truly be honest about what it is that you're eating. And so then if we're not willing to be honest with ourselves about what we're eating, then we're not even really willing to look at it in the first place, which means our ego is so firmly in control, and our ego never wants to be self-examined. It never wants to be looked at introspectively. That's why the myth around vampires never being able to look in the mirrors is such a relevant one, because anyone who's controlled by their ego, it is a vampiric aspect of self, and it's never willing to look at itself in the mirror. So that's the first step, is truly be willing to self-examine on what it is that I eat on a regular basis, and start at that point. And until we can address that, then a lot of people can't even do that. And if that can't be done, then there needs to be some more emotional work that needs to be done before we even go to that state. There needs to be some form of shadow work addressed to get to that space of, like, why can't I self-examine? Why can't I look at what I'm eating, or be honest with myself? And there are, of course, many things that we could talk about in that regard, but that, just coming back to the food, that's got to be the first thing to be done about it, is truly taking an honest look. And once you're willing to do that, once you've got an established point of saying, okay, this is what I eat, these are my eating patterns, whether it's all over the place, eating all things all the time. And I was there, I used to eat everything. I used to eat everything under the sun. I used to eat all sorts of restaurant food, fast food, meat, dairy, eggs, fried foods, like everything. I've been in that space to where it didn't matter what it was, free food, absolutely, I'm eating all of it. It was just a part of life. But when I started to really self-examine and see what effects these foods were having on me, it started to recalibrate my mind to be able to see, okay, these foods are really holding me back to some degree or another. And not that I need to let them all go. I mean, we can choose to kind of go cold turkey, and that's kind of what I did within my journey, but I don't really advise that route. I'm much more, for reasons that I'll get into, but the more sustainable approach is always the better one, because this isn't about a diet or a phase or just losing weight. And I guess that would be another thing to really look at first when you start to be honest with yourself about what you're eating, is then go to, well, why do I want to be healthy? Why do I want to change what I'm eating? And really hone in on that question. Hone in on what's the reasoning behind it. If it's just for a physical appearance, or if it's just for weight loss, if it's just for any of these kind of more surface level aspects, it's not going to integrate. And just to put it very bluntly, it will not stick. It will only be a short term, limited aspect kind of thing where you're just going at it for a certain phase. Um, the way to have it start to integrate is this recognition that I want to eat better because I want to live and I want to rise. I want to continue rising in this experience. I want to elevate my experience past the point where I am now, and I want to go higher. I want to gain a higher perspective. I want to gain a deeper sense of connection with this creation. I want to gain a deeper sense of connection with myself and with all of us, everyone around, and with God ultimately. And if I don't have that as my fundamental reason for embarking on this health journey, then it will fall short. Inevitably, it will be. It's just a short term thing. And if we go at it from a short term, kind of short sighted perspective, then that's all it will be. So having that holistic perspective and going at a full holistic approach. This isn't just for my body. This is for my soul. This is for this experience that I'm having, and I'm choosing to elevate my soul to higher levels. That's the space to really get into, to really start tackling this from a holistic perspective. So again, these are all things to be done as you're introspective and as you're examining this part of you, because then it really helps to curb the cravings and things that will inevitably come up. But you at least have a foundation to work off of, to say, this is so much bigger than that. This is so much bigger than this short little temptation that I'm going to give into in this moment. Not saying it's bad in every moment. We all have experiences and we need to go through those experiences. There's no wrong experiences in that regard. Everything's a process. It's all a journey. So don't beat yourself up either as we go through this. But just to have that framework of like, this is why I want to do this, because I didn't just come here to have a job and to, live and die and do nothing with my life. I came here to live, and to live abundantly, to become the best version of myself. And every day I want to become a better version of myself. I want every part of this process to be adding layers to me so that I keep rising. I become lighter, coming back to that light and life, aspect. So having that orientation is so hugely important to really embarking on this journey successfully. So when you can integrate that, then you start moving into the practical steps, the real practical steps. You've self-examined, you've looked at everything that I'm eating, you've established the reasons why I want to do this, and you've integrated that holistically, of like really imbued that with your spirit, like is this is what I want to. And then you can start looking at it practically and saying, okay, I'm going to examine all these foods that I'm eating, and I'm going to categorize those that are elevating me and which ones are bringing, holding me back. And you can usually find the ones that are causing the most harm. And we know most of this inherently, but if you don't know, then just continue doing research in this regard, and you can see which foods are holding us back. We kind of went over some of that order in the beginning. But I'll throw some practical, easy sort of low hanging things, low hanging fruit to kind of address first, the biggest things to tackle. So if we're gonna, look at it just generally, I always suggest people, I know people don't like to hear this and they don't want to if you're stuck in this mindset, but the meat, dairy, and eggs are huge. They're huge to let go of. That's a hugely powerful step to take. And if you can't do it all at once, then just reduce the amounts. The more that you reduce the amounts, I promise you, you will find that space of feeling where okay, this is not something that's made for me. This is not something that I need to be eating, because just the vibrational rising that you'll feel just by reducing the amount, I promise you, you will feel. And so if you can reduce those amounts and take it slowly, if you need to take it, go at it in the ways that are responsible for you. Excuse me. And this is another thing to be truly honest with yourself when you're self-examining, is what are my circumstances? Where am I within my family? What is my family eating? What is how much free time do I have to dedicate to this healing, this transitional path? How much I have to invest into these kinds of things? Can I send it fast, or these kind of, these are all questions to kind of go over. And that's why everyone's situation is a little different. Everyone has, obligations and things in their life. Some people can't dedicate a lot of time and effort and energy into moving into these spaces at an accelerated rate. So then if that's the case, then you need to slow down. I I think everyone's a priority. If your health priority, then I don't, that's again going back to this fundamental baseline of like, why am I doing this? If we can't even feel good in our own body, there's no way that we can reach these higher elevated states of spirituality. Because if I'm always in pain, if I'm always hurting, if I'm always uncomfortable, if my digestion is always off, if all these things are always distracting me, then I have no room for that state. And we talked about this in our Bible Decode series about the baptisms of water and fire, and the distinguishment between these two. And the baptism of water is this purification of the body. This is the physical purification to get to that space to where our body is, our temple is clean, and we're able to operate into these higher levels of awareness. And that's arguably the first step. That's arguably the first thing that has to be done before you move to the baptism of water, which is the cleansing of the mind. This is the cleansing of the thought and this spiritual realm. So this is what comes after. This is the next step after you've cleansed the body. You can kind of do both at the same time, but it's certainly much more helpful to have a clean body in order to move to these higher levels of purification. So again, going back to that sort of fundamental objective, or what is your aim behind feeling healthy and having that full-on health experience. Yeah, so that's a big part of it. And so yeah, going back to the practical of kind of what to remove, the meat, dairy, and eggs are a big part of it. You're going to be letting go of that animal bits and everything that comes along with that. We're consuming that. Our body's not made for it. I mentioned the parasites when we eat this kind of stuff, because our body's not able to digest on its own. It invites parasites in to be able to digest it, meat especially. And thank God for the parasites, because if we didn't have them, then this meat would, because our digestive tract is too long, the meat would putrefy in our gut, and it would, we would invite all sorts of nastier fungus in, because it has to break down some way or another. It putrefies in that way, and that would kill us, no doubt. So the parasites are there to save us, to some extent or another. But when we make this contract with parasites, it's like signing your soul to the devil. It is on a physical level. You're creating these creatures that are in this state of scarcity already, they're always afraid that their host is going to die. They're always afraid that they're going to die. You know, they're living in that scarcity mindset that is the parasitical way, you know. And so when we have this contract with these parasitical beings within us, then that imbues into our energy as well. You know, we're bound to the energy level of the accumulated effects of everything that we eat, or everything that we are, you know, everything that we consume physically. That's what we're talking about. But it really is every level. So we're intaking is affecting our vibration to a degree or another. So the parasites that are within us are keeping us in this lowered state of vibration. So letting go of those foods, the parasites have much less to work with, and they eventually leave as well. They die off, and we don't need them. You know, we don't need them to be part of our digestive structure. But while they are there, they're actually tapped into our nervous system. So they end up in a lot of different ways. So when they don't have food that they want, they send the signals to our mind to say, hey, go eat that food we want. Go eat that whatever. And so we get warped sense of idea that I'm naturally drawn to these foods, when it's in fact the parasites that's steering the show. They're the ones that's driving us. They're the ones that's making us do or leading us to all these different things, which it's the same as the cabal. You know, the cabal is the parasite, the ones that have tapped into our nervous system. They've got us in by their game, and they've steered us into all these horrible different things, but they need us because they parasite off of us. They harvest our life force, they harvest our creative energy, they harvest everything that we are. And so they need the host to survive, but they also steer the host into doing whatever. So it's just the same manifestation with inside of us, getting us to do all these different things. So animal products is a huge cat to let go of. And I know that's a hard one for people. I know it's a struggle for so many to do. And you know, as long as you need to, do what you got to do. But the faster that you can let go of those things, it really does help you move past that level. And so if you're like I said, if you're needing to use other foods, other dense foods to kind of replace those meals as you move away from it, um, you really realize that our lives don't need to be meat. You know, everything in organized society is meat based. Every meal is meat based. You know, every restaurant has like just every dish is full of meat. You know, it's all full of animal products. And until you stop eating it, you don't really see that. You know, you don't really see that everything is designed that way. And it's by design to keep us in this lowered state. They want to keep us in our root muladhara chakra. They want to keep us in this lowered state of fear. So if we're always eating the animal products that are full of that fear, then we stay in that fearful state. So as hard as that is, it's a huge area to let go of. And there's really no argument to eating them other than just it's a want. We like the taste of it or whatever. You know, that's the only reason that we continue these patterns. It's a learned behavior. It does take some effort to let go of, and that's why I said, you know, it needs to be a holistic a whole goal to why you're wanting to experience this health. It's not just a short fix. It's not just because I want to look better or whatever else. Like that's not going to work. It's not going to inspire you enough to move past this step. But it's a huge category to let go of. So that would be one kind of aspect to let go of. So however long it takes you to move past that stage, you know, even if it's just one bit at a time where you're saying, hey, this week I'm gonna only eat meat once a week or something like that, you know, or however you want to break it up so that you're incrementally moving away from it. But until you have mastered that step, don't try and pile on any more than that. I would recommend, I mean, you can, and again, this requires the circumstances, your individual circumstances about how much free time you have. You can go cold turkey and you can cut out lots of things all at once, but this is much more strain on the body to kind of this and create a sustainable pattern. So that's why I recommend kind of doing it one step at a time. And once you feel like you've really let go of that category, then move towards maybe letting go of anything fried and cooked oils. So anything that's really cooked in heavy oils, that's the oils in that form, especially when they're cooked at high heat levels, they do create quite carcinogenic, damaging effect within us. And these concentrated oils, they coat all of our intestines and our stomach lining and everything with that sort of unhealthy. And when you cook it, it becomes sorry, I forgot the word for it, but it's not good for us to eat, especially in its cooked form. But if you're eating oils combined with other foods, then all of those oils, they line your cell walls. And so your body can assimilate anything else. So it creates this inability of your body to do what it needs to do with the food if we're eating all of these cooked oils. So that would be a big area to let go of. Just anything that's fried in oils, anything that's cooked in heavy oils. If you're going to eat cooked foods, you don't need to use oil to cook anything. You can use water in a frying pan and you can have the same effect, cooked in the same way, and you don't need the oil. We're never taught that, but it actually works quite well. You don't do it on high heat, and high heat is a thing to avoid in general, because when we cook, if we're cooking things, cooking it at high temperatures is taking away that life-giving properties of that, the more so that we cook it. So cook it on low temperatures with water instead of oil, and you're really going to help to preserve that life-giving effects of those sorts of things. So that would be kind of a next phase to let go of things, to remove. You could either do that, or you could look to removing like the breads and grains, and that the glutens, that kind of stuff as well. That's another huge area that many are coming to realize they're gluten intolerant. We're all gluten intolerant, just to varying degrees. So anytime we can cut out those kind of grains that are really dense and hard to digest and heavy on us, it's a wonderful thing, a wonderful step to remove, a wonderful aspect to get out of. But again, it's usually a lot more sustainable to kind of just go one step at a time, to say, okay, I'm not going to eat those things anymore. I'm really going to get those out of my diet completely. But if I do try and do many things at once, we get excited about the end goal, or getting to that space of elevation, that creates and that only happens when we start to compare ourselves to, start to compare our journey to someone else's, and start to have these desires to want to make it happen faster than we're ready. So that's why I really approach moving past these things one step at a time. So just keep going down line logically until you're filling your days eating more and more fruit. And so I always recommend people get away from the dense, heavy foods in the morning and you're rising. In the first meal of the day, they've encouraged us to eat these dense eggs and bacon and breads and all sorts of things, which are just the absolute worst thing to put in your body first thing in the morning. But in general, they're horrible for us, but especially the first thing when you're breaking your fast, because we've just fasted that night prior. So if we're breaking our fast with these heavy, heavy foods, all of a sudden you're taking your body from a calm state of fasting to this, holy shit, like, what did you just throw at me? I've got to deal with all these things all at once and all mixed together, and it takes all this toil, and it's like, and then that sets our day up for failure, basically. Bogged down, mental fog, our body can't respond, it doesn't know what it's dealing with, and so it sets the precedent for us to be in a zombie-like state all day long. So I always recommend, if you can switch your first meal of the day to just all fruit, no matter what you're eating otherwise, just make sure your first meal of the day is 100% fruit. That's going to be the perfect way to start introducing food to your body once again, because again, it's the lightest, easiest to assimilate, easiest to digest food. And so it's a perfect warm up that no matter what else you're eating, this is a great first meal of the day. So start with your first meal of the day being all fruit. That's an easy practice that anyone can introduce and anyone can really integrate. And again, try and master that. So try and a week, or however long you want to say every meal I want to eat just fruit as my first rising meal of the day, and do that until it becomes so commonplace that you're not even thinking about it. This is just a part of life. And until you got into that space, then maybe don't move past that step, don't move past that space. And then from there, you want to be looking at introducing more fruit and less. So a lot of people will describe, I think, a really successful pattern, and really great way to like raw tiller or raw for kind of mindset of where I say that everything that I'm consuming, everything that I'm eating 4 p.m. Is going to be primarily fruit, but all raw. So, and then after that would be my cooked meal of the day. This is a great speed to always having that as often as possible, and then one kind of ground meal get you back into that place you're dealing with the sort of food cravings and things of that nature. But if you can master that pattern, that's an incredible to be at, and one that you can sustain for, because then you can start refining what that cooked meal is, to reducing the cooked oils and reducing the starches. We didn't really talk about starches that much. This is another kind of like gluey like substance that it's hard to process, hard to get through the body. So starches, again, are good for transitioning. They're wonderful for transitioning away from other foods, but ultimately they are not going to be the highest form of foods for us to be eating on a regular basis. But you can start to refine that cooked meal into a better and better version of it. So yeah, that would be that. And then, and also another easy step for anyone to kind of integrate the bat is intermittent fasting. So all this is just reducing your eating window onto a shorter and shorter period of the day. So pattern is people who from 8 p.m. that eating window. And so for the rest of that 8 p.m. to noon the next day, fasting. And it's that hard to do. It's really not that complicated because that's still that pretty sizable eating window. It's not like it's a crazy, and you can shift that and this whatever. But if you just have that window and you create that consistency, body loves consistency. Our loves to be on routine. It loves to have that regularity. Charlie's often said, but he says like what eating, if you're just consistent, your body is going to celebrate because it can itself to being able to adjust to whatever it is. So getting onto that eating pattern and then making sure that whatever it is you're eating, and then make little here and there as you want to move past certain things, but just stay consistent. Everything society teaches us is we've got to have all these varieties, we've got to be eating all these things all the time, and our body's like, well, I don't know what to do. You're constantly throwing different things at me and I can't adjust. And so then we're in this state of gray. We can't we can't catch up to ourselves. And so it's just creating those consistent patterns within what we're eating, when we're eating, and really reevaluating how we're eating these different things is a wonderful way to start transitioning away from these foods that are into these foods that will bring us back to that vitality and that life. It is a process, so it's not something to just take lightly or to move into it in any sorts of way, careless, anything like that. I mentioned my journey and kind of why I'm in the sort of more slow and steady route is I jumped into a juice fast. I went from a standard everything diet of eating meat, dairy, and eggs. I was drinking alcohol and just eating whatever. And I finally dawned on me to the point of like, oh, this is not life. I'm killing myself with everything. And I did. This was around the time that Josh X was leading a juice fast. And so I hopped on. I was like, this is it. This is the sign that I need to jump on this and do it with the group. And it was wonderful because it really gave me that recalibration of moving away from the foods that were into a space of life. So you can go that route, but this was 21 days where I was consistently juicing, and that's all eating, and that's all, no solid food, just raw living juice. And then I did a 3-day water fast at the tail end of it. And this is a perfect tool to kind of help to rebalance. But I might have, if I had done it differently, I probably would have come back into, because what I did is I went from that to staying 100% raw 6 months after that point. And while it did provide incredible benefits in lots of different ways, like my clarity and my mental elevated in that sort of sense, my body didn't catch up as much to that as well. My body wasn't quite able to assimilate all these raw fruits all the time. So what ended up happening was I experienced a period of weakness. My hair fell out to some extent. Had some unpleasant detox symptoms, which you can expect if you do go at it aggressively. Expect to have a pretty intense detox and a recalibration of your body as it gets rid of all the gunk and comes back into these spaces of life. So that approach that's available to anybody, but it's not as easy to do given circumstances that we're all in. So most everybody has different things going on in their life. So that's why I recommend now the more incremental approach of just taking it one step at a time, doing it as you integrating it to your life and moving on to the next step. So just one bit at a time. So an option. Now, if you do want to go the hard and heavy route, there's always water fasting as an option to kind of really help recalibrate quickly. And there are facilities out there. You can do it on your own as well. But if you're going to do a longer one, I'd recommend and you don't have a lot of experience, I'd really recommend finding a facility to do it with. You can be with that's trained on getting into the fast. And then it's very important to refeed properly when we move into a fasting period so that we're not just jumping straight back into dense foods that can actually be pretty harmful, potentially deadly. There have been people that have died from reintroducing certain dense foods too after a longer fast. So it does need to be something that's done with care. That's one of the most effective ways to clear so much junk and just junk our body and get back to that space of balance to where we can be assimilating and eating these high vibrational foods in a space that we can actually integrate them. So that's a tool that's available as well. But again, that requires quite a bit of commitment to sit there and do a 21 or 30 day or 40-day water. Not a lot of people can take them off or move into that space. So it's something that we have to take into consideration. So anyway, I've said a lot. Back to you to see where else you want to go with that.
Yeah, and just to let you know, oh, now you're back. You were frozen that whole time. So that's why maybe I wasn't as looking as engaging as I usually am. But yeah, so you're back now. Are you back?
Yeah, I hope I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
I can
The
hear
audio
you
came in
great.
okay?
Can hear you
Okay,
great. Just
that's
the
good.
visuals a bit. Anyway, have you got any practical tips around? Because great in theory, us all transition towards this eating fruit, but a lot of people, unless they're living by themselves, have got some hurdles to overcome around maybe partners or family who aren't willing to go on the journey with them. And also around costs, because unfortunately, okay, meat is expensive, but also unfortunately, the healthier foods, the fruits can be, if we're not living in a tropical area, can be also expensive. Have you got any practical tips around those two areas that you can share with us, please?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we're in relationship with a partner or family members and we're sharing a space, a living space, that's always a consideration to take to account for how I'm moving about that in a responsible way. Um, I've it's possible to isolate and kind of do it on your own, even when you're within those spaces, to introduce a lot more complications if you don't have people whom you're sharing that living space on board with the idea of you moving to into that direction. So I having not that you need to sell the idea, but just that conversation, that open communication around why I'm making these changes, having that invitation open to participate in those changes. um, at the very least, just communicating it clearly. That may very well known, this is what I want to do. This is how I be. This is how I want to make steps. This is how we can find these spaces together to still share a meal or share whatever sort of agreement. And it's different for everybody depending on how hard you go into the healing journey, how aggressive to kind of go at cleansing, and how willing your family members are in wanting to be part of that process as well. It does kind of have to be, it's all everything there, because it's like if your family's not on board with you changing that space, well, then you kind of have to start asking, well, why are you not on board with me wanting, this is for me to reach higher states of become a better version of me. So why is that a problem? And while this is a hard conversation to have, it's an important one. And if it's not had, then it's just delaying the inevitable, because there's some sort of condition that your family members are applying on you, where they are only loving the specific idealistic version of you, and not actually you. When we're truly with people that love us unconditionally, then supportive of where we want to go and how we want to be and what we want to do. And so this experience can invite that conversation, which can be a difficult one, because this could be a huge relation of like, oh wow, I'm in a relationship with people who want to keep me held back and want to keep me bound into the state of them. So it for everybody. But just approaching it in that space of knowing that, I need to have this conversation, and I need to make sure I'm communicating clearly. I'm not just um, blindly in that sort of space. That's kind of careless. I need to make sure I'm communicating clearly. I'm making sure what I'm doing is known. Um, but also without or expectation that it will get anyone else to go along with me, or that they will even want to or support that. That doesn't need to happen, but it's important to have that conversation so that realization can start to occur. Um, when there is some congruency, when there is some acceptance within that, then it's just looking at how can I have a translation point with you and your journey, with where you want to go. How much are you willing to push yourself, capacity, and where can we find alignment? Where can we create transitional meals or whatever that we're both happy with, that we're both aligned with, where you feel like you have what you need to get out of food, and I'm still moving into these higher spaces of where I want to go. That's a really responsible and healthy conversation to have always, because we're not meant to do this experience in a disconnected, isolated kind of way. We can, but it's where we go when we go all. It's about doing it all together and having the integrated experience. But with that sort of realization that not everybody has to go at the same route, or even at the same time. And then it just invites the conversation of, well, is this relationship serving us or not? And with kids, it's different, because we need to be responsible and to care for our children as they need that care for. When we're in a romantic relationship with a partner, if we can't come together on something like that, then it's like, well, what are we doing together? Where are we not growing in the same rate? Like, this is where I want to go. This is what I see as the right way to go. And if I can't even have that conversation with you, if I can't even get support from you in that, then we need to revisit this. They do. And most people don't want to hear that, because they're sort of afraid of that conversation. They're afraid of something looming in that sort of perspective. And I know it's a daunting one. I know it's not a fun one to have, but ultimately we're always going to be bound to the relationships that we have. They keep whatever state. So it's something that needs to be had. It's a conversation that's going to come up at some point or another, if we're truly genuinely trying to elevate, if we're truly genuinely trying to become better versions of ourselves, and not just stagnate into our sort of places before. So yeah, so it does introduce kind of quite a conversation to get into that. But it's important, because God is always leading us to these higher elevated states. He's always leading us to finding our highest potential. And sometimes the steps necessary are to move away from certain people if you're not to elevate into that space. And while that can seem harsh and like a hard read through, it just simply is. And while I cannot expect or impose my will onto anybody else and say that you have to do this with me, that would be ridiculous for me to say that you have to do this with me. Just the same, they can, well, you have to stay here with me. Neither is fair. So the only fair free will decision within that is choosing to engage, choosing to stay in a relationship, or choosing to say, hey, well, no, there's no wrong here. Not judging anybody. This is clearly we're not aligned in this relationship anymore. So we need to revisit it. So that's an aspect within the kind of incongruency. But if there is congruency, if there is that cooperation, then finding ways to have those bridges and habits, so that as I'm moving along within this food journey, I can say, okay, we're gonna have, and a great way to do it is to have, like a big, sort of kind of like a salad making Buddha bowl kind of concept meal where I've got all these different food types out there, and everybody to choose what foods they're putting into their bowl. Everybody gets to choose how they're creating their meal in that space. And so this really allows everyone to pick and choose their level that they're at. So I can have more of the cooked elements. I can have certain things out there that maybe I wouldn't eat, but it's there as a between so that they can create their desired meal within that space as well. And then we can still share a meal together. So that's a great way to have that translation, that bridge, so that we're acknowledging each other within this journey. We're acknowledging that we want to do these things together, but we're also acknowledging that we can do it somewhat independently in that regard too. And I can go at a different rate, and you'll catch up whenever you need to, and maybe we'll swap or whatever at different times. But that allows that freedom to. That's great for kids as well, because kids will, then you just provide a bunch of healthy options, but the choice is always it's always an attractive one when we have choices. Even with kids, it's like, hey, do you want to eat three pieces of mango, or do you want to eat pieces of mango? And they're like, I want to eat three, but that choice is still something that's attractive to them. They're still eating what's good for them. But it's giving them that choice. So the more we can provide that choice with our families and those around us, and then kind of agree upon what that choice container is. These are choices that we all find acceptable, and here's your choice within that. Is a really healthy way to keep that congruency within people who are aligned in that space. So there'd be some kind of helpful tips on that. And then you mentioned the food prices in general, and why everything that's healthy is so expensive. And again, this goes back to, it's all by design to keep us away from, I mean, I to keep us away from the foods that are helping us live. So they purposefully make the most expensive things, the the fruits and vegetables. They make them hard to get. They sell them to them in these stores in an unripened, sort of artificial way, where it's not optimal in the way that it's produced and the way that we have access to it, and it's expensive too. So this is all ultimately by design of some sort, because the society exists to teach to move away from the world. Babylon exists so that we learn to not live in Babylon. Like, this is all part of this higher lesson so that we can find our sense of independence within ourselves. So it's all very natural to have culty operating within that unnatural state so that we can move back into this natural state. So if it's difficult to get, then we need to be asking ourselves, why is this difficult? And the answer is, like, why am I not growing this stuff myself? Like, here's Mother Earth always providing us, and we can grow things in all regions, a region where you grow anything. So why am I not growing to grow right now? Even if you're just in a small, why am I not growing at least some herbs, something more and stuff to have this connection? What am I growing and what am I eating on a regular basis? And just start to practice that. Therapeutic move into that growing space as well. So there's an incredible connection that we gain when we start to take ownership, move back into the space of responsibility. So this is ultimately where we need to get to, as to where we're not relying on industries, we're not relying on anything around us other than, maybe community. Like our community should really be the space where everything should be self-sustainable, and gotten so far away from this idea. And so that's why it's difficult, because it should be difficult, because we need to get back to this space to where it's balanced, where we're back into this balance and we are taking responsibility and we are growing all our own food, and all these communities are self-sustaining. And when they're self-sustaining, then of course we can still trade and exchange and have fun with the communities around, but everyone is independent. So nobody's relying on anybody. Nobody's in this victim mindset where it's all scarcity. I'm afraid of losing. I'm not having an industry or a corporation that's able to clamp down on that supply lines and to steer us into whatever the other direction. Because when we give our power away in that regard, we're always creating these scenarios where we're going to be steered in all these horrible different directions. So if we can come back to taking ownership of the whole process and really asking ourselves, why did I get to this? Why am I doing nothing about this? And yes, I know there are lots of circumstances that we have to overcome first to move of that. But when we can start to have these honest conversations, then we can really okay, I need to taking responsibility. Why am I not working with neighbors, or why am I planting this tree that doesn't grow anything? That's me. It's that anybody trees doesn't grow fruit. It's like, why would you spend an effort growing planting a tree that doesn't do anything for you?
Yeah.
Yes, it provides shade and love, but why not grow this stuff that food, why not move back to that? So yeah, all that to just bring us back into this stability and awareness, so that we're connecting with the earth around us, and we're truly connecting with each other. You have to connect with her, with Mother Earth first. We have to connect with her first in order to connection with all of us. And so many of us are so disconnected from our Mother Earth. So we have no connection, and therefore we can't connect with what's around us. We can't connect with ourselves. So it all comes back to that.
Oh, so true. Yeah. And also, I think for people who are on a budget, just being aware of fruit prices and what's seasonal, and, if you can freeze or store, things, are just sort of being really practical in with fruit when it is in season, and, how you can make the most of the lower prices then.
Yeah,
Just
that's a good point. Just on that note as well, I forgot to mention. So if we are still buying from stores and things like that, like start to get to know your farmer is going to be a much better space than a local, than a grocery store, a corporate grocery store. So there's a optimum form of food, and our relationship with food is growing ourselves and having that provided abundance. That's not immediately feasible for everybody. So then it's again a stepping stone approach away from that. As you're moving towards a farmer's market where the farmers are local, everything's grown locally, it's not shipped far. Those are going to be more ideal. And then moving towards a lot of us just have grocery stores to deal with, and if that's the best we have, then that's what we have to work with. But you can still find spaces within to build relationships with the people at the grocery store, with produce department, to start to get deals on buying things in bulk. You can, if you live in near a big city, you can always find, at least in the US, I always had luck finding produce wholesalers, people who would normally sell to grocery stores, and oftentimes they won't have any issues selling to a consumer as well. They just don't advertise it because they don't really want to do it that often, but they will do it if you ask them. So I had no problem buying cases of oranges from these produce wholesalers at much lower price than we're going to buy oranges from a grocery store. And you get a whole case. And so if you oranges, it's a wonderful thing to do because you're going to go through them. So Produce wholesalers are a wonderful resource to tap into, buy things in bulk, and oftentimes you can break cases and things of that nature to buy less, half a case or a quarter case or something like that. If you can't go through that, but then you start to get really good at learning how to store things properly as well, as you mentioned, freezing and refrigerating and things of that nature. Different produce stores better at different temperatures, so there's research involved with kind of finding the optimum temperatures within those, but you can find really good deals, things like that. You just have to be more open to connecting in that sort of way and not just relying on this one-stop shop of I'm just going to buy it in the store because I always have. You start talking to people and you start researching, you start connecting with the area, you start asking people. It's all about, again, coming back into that state of responsibility, not just relying on the idea that society pushes onto us. It's like, no, there's got to be a better way, so I'm going to find it.
Love it, love it. Justin, well, we've covered so much. We're past the 90-minute mark, but I'd like to give you the opportunity, one, to let people know where they can find you, and because you do a lot of chats, Q&As on all this sort of stuff, open forum, so any further questions can be directed to Justin in person on his chats, and also then give you the opportunity to wrap it up and give your final words around the subject.
Yeah. So you can always find my website, justincarpenter.org. That's there's direct information. That's where I put most of my posts on there. So that's an easy space to find. Where I do most of my content creating is on Telegram. So that's where I'll have these conversations, as you mentioned, the Q&As. So on my Telegram channel is a great way. That's Just Carpenter is the name of it in Telegram. It's at Justin Carpenter 33. That's the name of the channel that you can find, and you can search for that. I have the links on my website, justincarpenter.org, and the links page there to find it easily. And then we do a health show on another channel called Healing is a Feeling. And the tag for that one is at Reknowing. That's run by a beautiful friend of mine. So that's at Reknowing, at Reknowing. That channel is called Healing is a Feeling. We talk every Monday. And it's a wonderful space to just not only go into just food. It's a holistic minded health. It's all about holistic health. And so we go and we talk about the food, we talk about strategies on what people are doing from the previous week, sort of challenges they overcome, but also it deals with what sort of emotions can come up as we start to uncover these different layers. A big part of it as well, and that's why holistically it's good not to isolate just the physical health. It's got to be viewed holistically. This is a huge part of everything. And we have to view it as such. We can't just pick and choose and say that I'm going to isolate this one example. This is about all of it. So that's a great channel to join in the conversation. If you have trouble finding any of those things, or you want to contact me directly, you can find me at Justin Carpenter word on Telegram as well. That's how you can message me directly. So that's where my stuff. I'll post things elsewhere sometimes, but it's mostly on Telegram. And that's it. And then as far as wrapping up, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Before you start, I just wanted to add, so it's just a great support system, these Q&As. If you're going through the food transitions and fasting, and you just want some support because we don't have it with our families or in our communities, they're both Justin and Reno are amazing. And I must say that I've got Reno on Heart Warriors this week. He's going to be our number 33 Heart Warrior. So we're going to actually see him and talk to him, and I'm so excited. So that's coming out in, I think it's like 2 or 3 days. So that's going to be exciting. Yeah. So just want to
that's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. I'm excited to see that one. He's just a beautiful, beautiful soul, so full of wisdom. He just has such a practical knowledge base because he's gone through much of this healing journey, and he's tried so many different things. It's not like secondhand information where he's relying on somebody else. He's like, no, I tried this and this is how it worked for me. Maybe it'll be different for you, but my experience has been. So it's really valuable when you have somebody who's got a lot of practical knowledge in that regard. So he's fantastic. That's going to be a good one.
Yeah, and
And then
he's got
yeah,
a young family, hasn't
just to
he?
wrap up,
Oh, sorry, he's got a young
yes.
family, so he can see it from that practical experience of, I think he's got 3 kids and a wife who's not quite on board. So, he's navigating the whole journey in a practical. So if you've got questions around it, join Justin and Reno on their Telegram channels, and you'll be able to get your questions answered.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point too. So it helps anyone who's got family and dealing with connecting and staying in that space, but also elevating their health, just how to navigate those spaces in a responsible way. It's a really wonderful conversation always. So yeah, those are great. So just to wrap up today, or how to kind of encapsulate and summarize all that together, it really does come back to what I said concerning come to this asking yourself, why do I want to do this? Like, why do I want to feel healthy? Why do I want to experience health? And if we can really get clear on that and not just stay in the superficial, that it's about looking good or whatever, losing weight, any of that, and come back to this realization that we're an internal being that's having this physical experience. I'm an energetic being that is having that is inhabiting this body for this time. And I'm not here just to live and get a job and have a short life and then die, without creating anything. I'm here to be my fullest expression of self in my creative potential. And when I can really integrate that and see that and know that, then all else comes as a byproduct. All else is so much easier to assimilate, so much easier to make as a part of that. So if you're not having that kind of internal dialogue, that kind of introspection yet, that's where I would start. That's that beautiful space to begin, is like, oh, let me re-examine everything that I spend my time with, everything that I'm have access to, or and partaking in, and that I'm in, and start to let go of all these holding us back from that full expression of self, so that we can really be versions of ourselves, so that we can let all these things that are holding on to us. Within the food space, it's much more, but this applies to everything. This applies to all aspects. So that's where I'd kind of leave it today. Come back to that holistic, balanced view of what it is that we're doing a lot about that on the awakening. But a bit of function of who we are, and awareness makes all this stuff fall into place naturally, because find balance. So when we are in balance, and when we bring balance, everything just gets better and better. So that's where I leave you today with all that. Thank you, Jared. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure. Sorry about the connection issues. This Mexican internet is not always the best. We're doing the best we can with it. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, that's fine. Actually, when you stop talking, then you come back to us. So I just wanted to add something really quickly. Because what you were saying, we're doing it for our own good and our own journey, spiritual growth, to come into the light. But I feel it's important to add, I just know from my own journey, that the clearer the vessel I am, I feel that I'm more pure in my mission, in my deliverance of what I'm giving in service to others, of how I can let the divine flow through me as a creator into, like manifesting heaven on earth. We're a tool, we're a
Mhm.
portal, and the clearer that we are and the purer that we are, and that goes for not just food, but our emotional environment, alcohol, cigarettes, all those things, you know, to really purify our body, to be a portal, a channel for divine creation, for God to flow through us and manifest heaven on earth.
Absolutely beautifully said and so true. Just the same, we have to put our oxygen mask on first, put another. So that's all listening with that conversation is we have to be willing to examine what are my limitations in order to get into that space. And naturally I become that abundant serving part of this creation. This creation naturally serves. And so when I am acknowledging my space and my connection within that, then naturally I want to be that highest expression to serve creation in the best way that I can. So beautifully said. Thank you for bringing that up.
Wow. Oh, I love this conversation. Thank you so much. So important just to keep getting the inspiration we need to continue this journey. It's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you know, eventually we'll get there with that. So thank you so much again, Justin. And no doubt we'll see you back on a future episode. And lots of love to you and the family in Mexico. So, and everyone, if you could like, share, get the message out, subscribe, and I will be back on Man Speak in another couple of days. Yes. Okay, bye.
Thank you, sister.